I've always felt that great standoffs make for excellent drama. Ronald Reagan versus that shitty wall. That time Big Daddy Diesel tried to install air conditioning ducts in a trailer by using Rey Mysterio's face. And Val Kilmer and Michael Behan trying to figure out who was whose Huckleberry in Tombstone.
I'm your Huckleberry.
Add to that magic in a weird supernatural black magic world, and you have Weird West. A game that wants standoffs both physically as well as morally is pretty rare because while many games will ask you why, which is a single question with a knowable outcome, the games from the Dishonored creators have always shrugged and said, why not? Does Weird West from Wolfeye keep that trend going? Sit on back, partner, and let's check it out and see. As always, the first 2,000 people who comment will be the first 2,000 people who have commented. When this game opens up, especially just right after that title screen, you realize almost instantly what they're going for in the presentation. Grit, dark-lined art, rough-hewn, dirty looking. Even the pretty people in the game aren't pretty. They're just less ugly than everybody else. It's a long look into a nasty world with nasty people doing nasty things and worse creatures. It's not going to win any beauty pageants, but it's the one that shows up looking drastically different than everyone else, and so calls a bit of attention to itself. That rough-hewn look extends to the entire game world. Slightly odd angles of enemies that are half ghoul, half plant that can crouch to the ground and almost slither run across it towards you. I love those almost unearthly kind of animations, and we see that in many parts of Weird West. It's a fantastic overall tone for a game trying to reflect the Old West in a black magic-infused world. Everywhere you go, the game is trying to make you understand exactly what this is. Ladies of the Night who look like they stayed up through it, to the side characters you hire, a who's who of wanted posters, all in the making. It's not particularly flashy as a game, but it does what it can, with a wealth of explosions, oil seeping across the ground, lighting enemies on fire, or you and your friends if you're close enough, or the odd mini ragdoll physics of enemies dropping downstairs as you blast them away. And each character has special moves, not only throwing enemies around, but making them convulse if you shock them, fall down steps if you stun them. Every location, when you decide to leave, has a map-style edging around it, giving you this feeling that you're actually exploring on some old dude's treasure map. When you get out of the in-game combat and exploration moments, you see this thing that looks something akin to a board game in the overworld, with everything in bold lines and some contrasting colors and glows to pull your eyes to the things that matter, like new locations in your story or old locations with something having changed. And as you explore that and you explore the fog of war and it starts to erase around you, you realize that this world actually is a little bit bigger than you may have originally assumed. When it comes to the characters themselves, they have their own list of special moves, and you haven't lived until you've played a sentient piece of 280-pound bacon who can turn his skin into rubber to bounce bullets back to the bad guys. The feeling of impact with the weapons is also incredible. Even when zoomed out, that feeling of kinetics is right there. You lurch into a tavern and your six guns are shouting metal dovahkiin at enemies. They get pulled backwards like a stage hook or moving them from a bad act. Or if you drop cluster dynamite, it rips through large group of bad guys, lighting them on fire and just throwing them everywhere. There are for sure some rough animations, especially when, let's say, you're grabbing an item that you can only interact with by grabbing and throwing to distract an enemy. You will see that just sort of floating in front of your character. While the side quests, the battles, and their makeup is random from every single start that you have, you do get some repeated tile sets. This is noticeable for sure. There's a couple that are bases and also used as bounty hunter targets, as well as random places you may see in the game world. It is very noticeable in some of these, though, because a lot of their items and their locations are in the same spot, and then that area is repeated, regardless if the exact reason you're there has completely changed. Speaking about the performance, though, it's fairly solid 4K above 60 on, of course, the 3080 as it should be. There are still a couple visual issues that you can run into. One level or one particular area that I went to, even repeated somewhere else, there was an odd graphical issue where the grass in the world flickered oddly when I moved the camera. I also had an odd stutter that on some locations would start up when I loaded into graphically intensive places where graphics were actually already occurring. Something special was already going on. This was maybe 10 to 15 times over 40 hours, but it was noticeable. It was really stuttery, and then it would smooth out after a couple seconds, and this was tested on 2 different computers. Also, the game can autosave a great deal, and that's cool, but it does this and that causes a pause. It just does. I'm not sure if they will be able to fix this, but be aware. It's actually pretty annoying to go into a new spot and having that autosave sort of pop everything for just a moment and then start back up again. Presentation, just as a package graphically, it's got some weak spots, but most of it is fairly strong when it comes to character and art design and ideals. It's not going to absolutely shatter the market for AAA kind of titles when it comes to its polish, but it certainly does lend an atmosphere to its presentation. presentation isn't just graphics. A little bit about the audio side. Musically, the game has a number of very long, drawn out, but just sort of single chords that play for a good deal of time. Very melancholy, especially in cave sections. When exploring, it's almost the ambient sound of the cave itself until it changes up and you realize it's not just the low droning of maybe people talking within those caves. Most of the music is like that, with only a few tracks that might make you think of Western movies, shows, or games. It's when you get into battle you notice that the game does not draw out any kind of thematic battle music. In fact, it's usually just this disconcerting underlying shrill moment and then a piece that plays off after it. It's almost like an alarm that's slowed down. You have this synth playing a simple series of flat keys beneath that, and then it fades away again on that same siren sound, almost indicating the end of that encounter. And I love it. I didn't think I was going to like that, but I actually think it works here. It is far more John Carpenter than it will probably get credit for, but it works. However, it doesn't have that bit when you go into the towns or the locations where there's more cluttered areas. I think that is a missed opportunity. Sure, it lets that dire feeling creep and sink into everything in the game, but even during the best of times. But there isn't anything ever more upbeat about the music, but I would have liked a little bit more contrast in some of these locations. Let's talk about the voice work for a second. This is lean, but it's also incredibly well done. The world is grim. If they had a sporting event, they'd launch babies out of t-shirt cannons into the crowd, I'm sure of it. The story, the delivery of it, and a ton of the side and main narrative is really dark and dire, so be prepared for that. Now, normally I would find that lack of full voiceover really bothersome. Smartly, though, Weird West as a game has an intimate knowledge of its own strengths and weaknesses. So instead of a game with no voice where you're just smashing the X button like you're trying to kick Rose off the last bit of floating part from the Titanic, here, short, quick bursts of narrative occur with only the occasional rumbling diatribe in written form. The narrator comes in during the main story moments, and the rest of the audio is actually this weird warble-like submerged mix, which gives the lines an otherworldly kind of feel, but doesn't require voice actors to hit emotion and marks all the time. But at the same time, it also doesn't feel like what we see in a lot of other games, especially Japanese role-playing games, where there's a very high-pitched, almost comedic whirl. Here it is submerged, and that works. So too do the audio samples, especially when it comes to combat. It's almost a surprise the moment battle comes out. It breaks out into this cacophony of sound, especially because everything is much quieter and has a lonely feeling. And then you go in, rapid six guns firing, shotguns, explosives, six shooters, all of these things going off. And then randomly, a pigman squirts out poisonous fluid into the battle area, or a siren comes spring crawling towards you. That surprise, that instant sound is exceptional. That does offer a contrast. Also, when you find specific needed things like perk cards, the game has a nice tonal change to indicate the lucky grab. And strangely enough, it's very useful in a game like this, especially because you are grabbing a boatload of items all at once. I think when it comes to the audio, they did as much as they could with what they had, and overall, really smart decisions here. Was it smart in gameplay, though? Weird West does a couple things very differently. It has you starting out as a character going through their journey, then almost retiring that character and taking on the mantle of another, like a Viking epic, starting children in a line of family succession, except here, they aren't family. Instead, they have this tie that binds them, a narrative that contains them within this sprawling saga. You could think of it as Octopath Traveler, but the characters actually getting to know one another at some point in the future. While Wild West looks sometimes like Desperados or many other Western-based games, it's an alternative reality, a specific altered reality. A history of its own, where magic, the supernatural, exists right along with the Wild West. The game starts out with you searching to find your husband, who is kidnapped and shuttled off to be the main course in a 7-course buffet at a bad guy's hideout. The narrative rolls out with you taking on main quests, side quests, and sometimes just random hunting parties to track down what has happened. And each of the main characters have some kind of special ability for them. For example, the first character, she's a female bounty hunter. She's having put down her smoke wagons years ago for a docile life on the farm, and then she gets picked back up to go out into battle. So she has particular skills, a couple of them, that are very defined for her, as well as the others do. Now, traveling around the game world is done on this overland map that tracks the time to travel, locations you've gone to or are heading, and as you move, it deletes that fog of war on it and plops down a ton of mysteries, locations, NPCs, and just place together information for you in the story. Each character has not only their own inventory where they can equip armor, 3 types of guns, as well as a bow and arrow, They also have one of the best things about this game, which are amulets that help you fight against enemies, and I'll talk about in a second. When it comes to each character, they also have perks and abilities. Abilities are purchased with supernatural creature parts you find in the game world, or in a couple locations you can actually buy them. Each character has their own specials listed on the left, like charging through bad guys or chanting to make everyone nearby follow their lead for a couple seconds. Then there are also the weapon abilities. They're tied to revolvers, handguns, shotguns, bows, and up-close weapons. The ability to hit super long distance shots is here, silently. You can sprint across open ground to stab somebody, or fan your hammers on your gun, blasting away an entire revolver's current ammo with one shot. These are set for each character. They do not overlap. However, perks do. These are where you find a golden ace of spades card. This lets you buy perks that continue throughout the entire game for every character, even when you switch out those characters. The ability to move faster in sneak or heal more, jump higher, shoot faster at aim, get better prices at stores, or be better as a leader, massively upgrading the posse damage are all included. Anything you buy when you jump into the next journey, that is also updated on the new character. Now, dropping into the world itself, real-time stealth and action. This has you moving behind cover, jumping into bushes, and watching enemies' vision cones for that single moment to move behind them and get up close to choke them out. And if anybody wants to know, yes, stealth is very viable in a lot of the locations here. But when true combat begins, you play in full speed, real-time mode, using the keyboard to move and the mouse to aim, as well as slowing down time if you want, and playing out in this very slow, almost bullet time kind of mode. Both work fine, but the game does take into account all sorts of cover as well as friendly fire, so slow motion mode might actually be safer. And if you think it's a cheat, wait until you face off against a group of supernatural soul suckers who are pretty much fast, even in slow motion. And they will just continue to charge you down no matter what you're doing. Well, the game really doesn't have any puzzles per se. It does shift that over and focuses instead on morality and tracking it, of the characters, of their reputation, as well as the continued overarching story amongst the team. For example, these are just some of the things that can happen. Digging up corpses, stealing things, shooting innocents, or making bad moral decisions can see allies leave your group and bring a posse back after you. The same thing can happen if you're taking down enemies in some panic and run with an alert that a vendetta against you has been made, and they will come back to try to kill you at a later time. At the best of times, this makes the game world feel living, with you deciding who to shoot, not to shoot, and how the devil's deals are always winner takes all and loser pretty much takes nothing. You find yourself saving people, making friends for life, and these characters will then return in hard firefights to help you. But if they die, well, they're just gone too. As the game rolls out, is just this monstrosity of choices, not because it's ugly or nasty or bad, but because what you can do is almost assuredly not what you should do. And what you should do inevitably leads to your final decision, which is what you're going to want to do. You may make the world harder, though, by doing so. For example, just the leadership system in the game. If a posse member does die in battle, vultures and all types of creatures will start chewing on them right away. And in some places, you'll see wolves doing the same. You might be asked by a posse member's family member to bury them, or you might be threatened by them if they feel that you made a bad choice and got their family member killed. They can come and go. You can outfit them, then drop items in their inventories that they use, tell them what to equip, but they all have their own AI, using their weapons and healing whenever they want. And if you travel with them and then decide to split up with them because you want somebody else, they also usually become lifelong friends, which means another group of people who will come to save you. And let's look at mission flexibility, for example. I had a mission where I could take about 4 actions that I could track easily. That was kill a family, kill their enemies, find blackmail evidence, or kill the man who sent me to do all this. I guess you could also say sneak in and steal paperwork for this job as well. I ended up killing the bad guys, but I also, while exploring, had stole that paperwork, so just sort of had it as a safety net. Mission done, right? Sort of. I got complete. Everybody was happy. And then a day or two later, I got a letter saying that the owners of the house knew I was sneaking around because I had come up and talked to them, and they knew that I'd stole the papers from the safe, and they were coming after me. So then, later on, they were also an enemy, even though I didn't kill them, and I actually helped them out with this deal. And in fact, when I reloaded that and put those papers back in, that warning didn't happen at all. Speaking of letters, mailboxes are all over the game world. Click on them, read mail, and you can find people discussing jobs that you've done, secret meetings that you can see later, thoughts that they have towards the cities, weaknesses of characters and creatures, and myths. There's a ton of stuff. Action points let you pull off these special moves in combat. Each weapon has ranges as well, with noticeable drop-off of damage when you aren't within it. Or you can grab a bow. If you need a fire arrow or a poison arrow, you just run the bow through a torch nearby. It lights that arrow on fire. Or come across a poisonous bit of the land or a barrel, dip it in that, and now you have a poison arrow. And battles are hectic, and they can be very deadly no matter what. But one thing that you do have, which I mentioned a second ago, were these amulets. And I want to talk about this for a second because there are some very unique ones here that I don't think I've seen in a lot of other games, and they change your strategic investment all the time. You'll see items that say during the dark, or if wet, or if your reputation is low or high, changing entire ways that you can outfit a character, or what character that you're playing, who might want that amulet and who it may not work for. As I continued to do jobs as the pigman, I switched out the bonus to damage from being low reputation to another one that made my action points recharge faster if I was low on hit points, as well as another that only worked when I was wet. So I found myself running through water during the battles to get that to sort of kick off. Also, you have the ability to craft, making guns better by finding items and minerals along the way. But even when searching a dead body, the game lets you not have to grab a gun from their inventory to break it down. You can actually break it down in that actual inventory trade-off screen, saving you a couple steps. You can also buy, find, and upgrade armor at tanneries. In a stroke of genius, the characters you played also, if you go back to join up with them, they keep their inventories from the adventure prior, meaning if you go and hire them, they have ramped up items, armor, and amulets. Hell, even the camping isn't just camping in the game. Not only can you sleep to eat or cook various foods to heal, but the pigman can eat the dead to heal. Also, most of the campsites have animals you can shoot to get meat to cook if you didn't have any. And one of the big things I was wondering about with this game is how differently would each character play. Let's talk about the pigman for a second. He looks like an extra from Mad Max 4, scary shit you might see on the road. I'm pretty sure he'd play dodgeball with bar darts. He is huge, scary, and his intro is almost caustically dark, to the point where you realize, man, no choice in this dude's life is going to be good. But at every turn, the game's story actually surprised me. So Pigman is hated by the locals, meaning buying and selling isn't going to be as easy as the prior character until you take some missions, but you have to do that by taking missions along the peripheral of society. Then, as your reputation rises, you see news reflecting what you've done, and you may get some missions where people are going to vouch for you for their town. So if you complete them, you can now go in like a normal person. And to me, whether it be the choices I made or the actions I took, that kind of action and reaction is the kind of game I was hoping for. As you wrap up the game, it shows you what choices you made and what you did, indicating a huge amount of replayability. Happens at the end of every journey as well. For example, I killed a character in the journey and then in the next heard about their death from the news and from other people talking about it. Then I circled back and didn't kill that character, and they were now on the bounty board, killing people, looting towns, just basically being a shitbird. You can feel that tangible moment of decision coming back around to hurt you. Even the overworld map is adjusted. The interactivity in this game is stunning. You can steal a horse. It lets you ride across the world faster, and you're going to get attacked less. However, a stolen horse will always return back to the owner whenever you're stopped, leaving you to be attacked. But if you buy a horse, it doesn't do that. It stays there, letting you retreat many times. But if horses are in a level and you need some distraction, you can also surprise them, causing them to run off and for the enemies to search to kill them. Kill everybody in a town. It becomes abandoned, and sometimes evil moves into it, turning a place of commerce into a place of come meet your doom if you forget and go flying in expecting otherwise. Speaking of enemies, though, let's discuss AI and difficulty for a second. So difficulty ramps up damages and other effects, including friendly fire, which I can tell you is a thing in this game. It slightly seems to adjust the AI, but for the most part, the AI has two great bits and one element I would like to see fixed. First, the good stuff. AI paths and movement are usually quite large, interweaving amongst others if they're running a guard pattern to the point where you might think you're safe, but you haven't studied it long enough. You open a door, the AI might now go through that door or search inside, which then adjusts their entire path. And many times they react realistically. When attacked by surprise, for example, with a stealth gun, it can take them a bit to find you when attacked in that way, especially if you're using cover well enough. And then when you go into full battle mode, they run around, they duck, dive, dodge, and as I said, sometimes retreat, and many times can get in each other's way. However, in some locations, they did not notice battles near fast enough. And in other places, they noticed more quickly than I was actually expecting. I don't know if that's a bit of randomness here, but in the end, being more cautious does pay off because you never quite know when that might actually occur. And that's a lot. And that's not even near the amount of interactions or what you can have in that reflection you see in the game. Does that make it perfect? No, it doesn't, because as you guys know, I do look at a game's bugs and I judge them pretty harshly. This game had a couple. The first is that sometimes when I arrived at a location, the friendly eye didn't do shit. They just stood there like contestants on The Voice, waiting for some kind of judgment. I would usually have to reload into that place or go away a little bit and then come back to it. Other times, the actual horse would come into the location with the posse member in the same exact spot, stopping the posse member from being able to really move out of their spot, which again did require me to leave and come back. Sometimes just ends up stopping them. This didn't happen as much without a horse, but a couple times it did. So those are some very real bugs I would like to see them actually take over. When it comes to quest stopping bugs, I didn't have any. I didn't do all the quests because a lot of these quests in their makeup are going to be a little bit random from person to person because that's how the game puts in the side quests at least. But when it comes to main quests, I didn't really have any issues there. How much did that affect my fun factor? I do have to say, this is one of the few games where everyone and everything is interesting. Posse members begin to become these short-term family members, and sometimes letting them go back to their normal life felt like a better idea than leading them into a hard-packed battle, which is a cool decision that I can say I really haven't had in other games. It's probably the only game in the world where burying the body of a comrade who died, trying to fight off a bunch of ghosts to help you, felt real. The interaction between everything is actually pretty incredible. I was feeling my way through stuff, finding new ways to do things even later in the game. And since you can kill anybody in the game, that's also there as an option if you want to pay the price. But what did affect the fun factor is that repetitive tiling. Funny enough, it impacted actually more than any of the other stuttering issues that I had or anything like that. Just going into the same place, and this definitely happened more as the first character than as the other characters because the game just does sort of move you around the map as you go, and you can still go back to all those old places, but that was a little bit hedgy. Also, the control never really feels perfect. In slow motion, it was easier, but the way the game lets you choose not only the direction, but the elevation of your shots, sometimes in hurried battles, you end up shooting an explosive round at your feet because in the anarchy, you didn't notice your guns were lowered in front of you. Did I die from it? Maybe once or twice. Was there a save game that had auto-saved right prior to that? Yes. Lastly, an issue about the buttons. Tab is slow motion. Alt is your weapon wheel. So, you may decide you want to go into your weapon wheel and pick a different weapon. Well, the game also unslows down the game when you come out of the weapon wheel. Now, this is most likely on purpose as a penalty for switching weapons. I actually don't see a problem with that. It reminds me a little bit of a game where switching a weapon is 1 action point and shooting a weapon is 2. However, you have to hit tab to slow it down again. Guess what that can result in? Alt-tabbing out of the game. So be aware of that. That definitely was an issue, and I did run into it in those default settings. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale. This is on Game Pass. It's also out to buy if you don't have Game Pass. I think absolutely it's worth the price. It does have some bugs. It does have some performance issues. It also, man, it was just a blast. It was a blast with so much interactivity and that ability to reflect my actions on the game world. No matter how realistic they were, no matter how they actually were just fluff sometimes with just a newspaper article, or real where a posse came back after me, or I didn't kill somebody so they became a bandit and I had to chase them down. That kind of stuff is exactly what I'm looking for. Even if it's encased in a couple issues, I'm fine with that. This is a game that I have absolutely enjoyed, and I will continue playing multiple times to see all the different decisions and how different the game is when a new person starts a new game, or me starting a new game, and you can see sort of a differences in those side quests, any of the procedural content. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. I would love for you to subscribe. You can check out our Reddit if you want to continue to talk about this game. Jump in there. We can talk about games. You can jump into the Patreon as well. It helps me continue to give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Peace out. I hope you enjoy your week.